The only one?
You're not. You're the only one who's not actually partaking in the bagels.
I'll have to be there next week.
Even Bill came today, your partner in crime, to be on Zoom.
Okay.
All right. Okay. So as advertised, why have there not been any bar mitzvahs anywhere in the entire world? There hasn't been a single bar mitzvah in practically a month, a few days shy of a month. Sorry? You bet I'm lying. I got some interesting responses. I put this on my WhatsApp status, and I got a response from a friend in South Africa that in his shul there's a bar mitzvah every Shabbos. So there's like sort of nobody wants to double up. So there's backup. So now the whole month with no bar mitzvahs has been a time for catch up, and there's been a bar mitzvah every week. Another friend of mine said that he's had some reform bar mitzvahs in his community, but there hasn't been any halachic bar mitzvahs anywhere in the entire universe. So, well, they could have, well, maybe they pass it like a different shitta, or maybe they're doing it for girls or boys, whatever it is, I could put him. All right, so you've probably guessed we're going to be talking about the halachas of a leap year, of Adar I and Adar II, very interesting stuff. Yes, people could get married, people could die, apparently. We had a yard sale, right, okay. So, what we're not going to talk about, we're just going to sort of take a thing for granted, is the reasons for leap years, right? We just mentioned this yesterday, and we could discuss this many other times, why we need to have an extra month once in a while. We're not going to get into the reasons for that and the technicalities of that. We're just going to take that for granted for right now. Now, once upon a time, they didn't have a fixed schedule of when the leap years were. There was the Bezdin, the same Bezdin, who every month would sit and accept testimony from the witnesses for sighting of the new moon, and incorporating also other calculations, would determine whether any particular given month would be a month of 29 or 30 days. So they were also in charge of deciding whether this year, any given year, would be a year of 12 months or of 13 months. When did they do this? So there's a Mishnah in Adius. Adius is literally means testimonies, and it's basically a collection of random testimonies of Tanoim on a broad range of different topics. And one of the testimonies over there in Masechtas Adius, Perek Zayin, Mishnah Zayin, chapter 7, Mishnah 7, that they said, Heim heidu shema'abrin atzashana b'chal adar. They testified, I forget the names of the Tanoim who testified this, because their names are mentioned in the previous Mishnah over there, which I did not copy from my notes. But those Tanoim testified that they could make the year a leap year for the entire month of any time in Adar. And there were others before this testimony was transmitted that they said, no, you could only make the Bezdin have to decide that the leap year will be a leap year before Purim. Once Purim has passed, they can't say, oh, no, actually that was Adar 1, and we're going to add another Adar. That was the original thought. Came along these times, they testified, no, actually, the Bezdin can decide to add another month after Purim. So they celebrated Purim on the assumption that this is a non-leap year. And then on the 20th or 25th, whatever day of Adar after Purim, until the end of the month, they could say, no, actually, for whatever reason, the roads are still too wet, whatever the various calculations were, we're going to add another month. And that's totally fine. And as we'll see soon, in such a scenario, they would celebrate Purim again for the second time around. Then the Mishnah adds another thing, that they could even make the leap year on a Tanai with a stipulation. So if the Rosh Bezdin Ma'aseh Rabbi Gamliel, there was a story, Rabbi Gamliel, who was the Nasi, he was in charge. Shahalach little Rishus Mehegmin B'Syria, he was on a political mission in Syria, and he didn't come back in time. So, but they were, in other words, he by the time he got back, it was going to be the next month already. It would be, well, we don't know yet if the next month is Adar II or Nisan, but it would be the next month already. So what are they going to do? The Ibra Sashana al Tanai, they made the leap year with a stipulation, the Kshayit to Rabbi Gamliel, that if Rabbi Gamliel will return and say, yes, this was a good decision, then their announcement of the leap year holds valid. And if he says, no, actually, I want it to be, he's the one who gets the veto powers, the final decision. In fact, he agreed with their decision to make it a leap year. Okay. Now, that's
go back before the base 10, it already said that that Passover had to be in the springtime.
Yes.
Okay, so that happened after the Exodus. So between that time when
Yes.
was out that we decided that.
Yeah, so there was always the Beis Din who was in charge of Kiddush HaChodesh, of sanctifying the moon of the month, who was also in charge of this. And then, as we'll see soon, once Hillel HaZaken established a calendar which incorporates our 19-year cycle, which we'll touch upon in a moment, then it became fixed which years are leap years.
What if the Nasi didn't get back until after Pesach was supposed to be?
Sorry. Tana Rabbanan. Okay, so that's how late. That's how late you could go. What's the latest they could announce a leap year? Is initially the thought was until Purim, but then it was established they could go as far as the end of the month of Adar. How early could they do it? You're welcome to join us, and when it's a good time to ask questions, please raise your hand. I think I can't. It just disrupts the flow too much. This is in the Gemara in Sanhedrin, based on Medalef, that the Brisa says they can't announce the being a leap year before Rosh Hashanah. So if in the month of Elul they announced that the coming Adar was going to be 2 Adars, that doesn't count. And then if they don't announce it again after Rosh Hashanah, it's not going to be a leap year. It's just going to go straight from Adar to Nisan. If times are strenuous, if there's considerations that they need to make the announcement early, they could make the announcement as soon as Rosh Hashanah as soon as it's past Rosh Hashanah, they could announce and declare and send out messages, etc. That next year, that this coming Adar will be a double Adar. Nevertheless, you could only add others, even though you could announce the leap year 6 months prior. You can't add a second Tishrei or a second Cheshvan Kislev Tevis. The only month that you could add 2 of is Adar. Why do we have to add only Adar? So Rashi and Tosfos both make a suggestion. Rashi says that the reason, at least the primary reason for making a leap year is Shomer is Chodesh Aviv, like Ba mentioned, to keep Pesach in the correct season in the spring. So therefore, the implication of that pasuk Rashi says is that the month that's going to take care of this, the month that's going to address this issue, is the month immediately preceding the spring. So the spring is in Nisan, right? And the problem is if Nisan gets too far back, then Nisan is going to be in Tkufas Tevis, which we call in English the autumn or the fall. So no, the winter, right? How's it go? Tishrei is fall, right? Tevis, December is autumn or winter? Winter, right? So we don't want spring to come straight after, right? If we don't want Nisan to be in the winter, so then the last month preceding Shomer is Adar. That's Rashi. Tosfos says an interesting thing. Yes.
There's a great Toyota van that's blocking my ability to leave the parking lot.
Great. We want you to be in the class.
Oh, yeah. Coming right now. Oh,
okay. All right. So no price. Okay, so Tosfos has an interesting thing. In the arguably the first time we have the names of the months is in the Megillah, not all of the months, but many of the names of the months we find in the Megillah, right? Teves is mentioned in the Megillah, Sivan is mentioned in the Megillah, and Adar is obviously is mentioned in the Megillah. Prior to that, and also in the latest Sfarim, Ezra and Nehemiah, over there you have it, but prior to that, in our scripture, the months are always referred to by the numbers, month 1, 2, 3, from this and to other, right? Now in the Megillah, you have the Chodesh name Asar Hu Chodesh Adar, the 12th month for the 12th, in the 12th month, the month of Adar. So if you were to make a leap year by adding, say, another month of Teves, then Adar wouldn't be the 12th month, it would be the 13th month. So in order to avoid Adar being the 13th month, or not being the 12th month, we could only add Adar as a leap year. That's what Tosfos says. It's interesting to note that in the Yerushalmi, they use this pasuk for a completely different meaning, which we'll get to later, and not a contradictory to Tosfos, but just bear that in mind. Okay.
But even then, the month in which you're going to celebrate Purim is the second Adar, which is the 13th month. So Imanashach is still going to end up in the 13th.
Okay, so we have we know that we can make a leap year and we have the month of Adar. Now that we have a fixed calendar, we have certain years fixed where we have a leap year, and basically the idea is that generally speaking, that the lunar year is 11 days shorter than the solar year, and more or less, if in every 19 years you have 7 leap years, which 7 times 30, so each month is 30, so it basically equals itself out. That more or less, again, it's a really complicated topic. We've mentioned it in the past in the context of Kiddush HaChodesh and Birkas HaChavla and all sorts of other things. But the simple version is that you have 7 out of every 19 years be a leap year, and that's a cycle that repeats each other and repeats itself, and more or less we stay on track. Which years are those? It's year 3, 6, 8, 11, 14, 17, 19. Right? Because, I mean, I'll just digress a moment for the math. If every year you're 11 days, right? So on the third year, by year 3, you're 33 days behind. So now you add 30 days. Now you're back. You're only 3 days behind. Okay. Then after another 3 years, you're now 36 days behind, because 33 plus 3 left over from last time. So now you add a leap year. Now you're only 6 days behind. Then you make year 8, where you're only going to be 28 days behind. So you're going to make a leap year. And now you're going to be 2 days extra credit, right? And then follow that cheshbon through, and that's how it comes out: 3, 6, 8, 11, 14, 17, 19. So those are the 7 years that again, and please don't get distracted by that if that's too complicated or whatever. Like, it's really not relevant to understanding the topic we're going to discuss right now. Now, the question now becomes: okay, so we have Adar I and we have Adar II, which is the main one? Which Adar is the main Adar? And this is a topic, this is the question which everybody discusses. Okay, let's start. So the Mishnah Megillah Davavim and Beis says, Karas Megillah b'Adar Rishon. If they read the Megillah in Adar Rishon, in Adar I, V'nis Abra Hashana, and then after Purim, they announced that actually there's going to be an Adar II. You have to read it again in Adar Sheni. Now, again, this is based on the Mishnah in Adius that we said before, that the Bezdin could declare it to be a leap year after Purim. So they read the Megillah in Adar I, thinking that this is just Adar, right? And then, hey, it turns out that they added another month, so you have to read it again. Now, l'chayra, we could deduce from here that but what's axiomatic to the Mishnah is that we read the Megillah in Adar II, right? So if it's a leap year, we're going to read it in Adar II. If they read it in Adar I for whatever reason, and then they make it a leap year, then you have to do it again in Adar II. So clearly Adar II is the main thing, right? Now, in the Gemara, there's a whole discussion, and it brings more opinions about this, whether Purim should be celebrated in Adar I or in Adar II. And we know that we paskin that Purim is in Adar II, right? So that would seem to be a proof that Adar II is the main Purim. That Adar II is the main Adar. However, if we look in the Gemara, both in the regular Gemara, in the Babylonian Talmud, Talmud Bavli, and also in Talmud Yerushalmi, we'll see a number of reasons given why we celebrate Purim in Adar II. First of all, but before that, by the way, why the opinion that the Gemara brings, it's not brought in the Mishnah, but the Gemara brings from a Braisa, the opinion that you celebrate Adar in Adar I, right? What's the reason for that? So first, the Gemara says, both of them are deriving their opinion from the same pasuk. It says in the Megillah that Purim should be celebrated b'chol shana v'shana. Comes along Rabbi Eliyahu Rapoport Yossi, who says he's the one who says that you celebrate Purim in Adar I, and he says just like in every year you celebrate Purim in the Adar immediately next to Shvat, so to in a leap year you celebrate the other thing in the Adar immediately close next to Shvat. Then Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, he says no, just like every year it's the Adar immediate preceding Nisan, so to here it should be in the Adar immediately preceding Nisan. Now I didn't have a chance to look into the commentaries over there to see if there's sort of any more logic to it than what just the simple words of the straightforward translation of the words of the Gemara. But at face value, neither of those seem to be any of a stronger argument than the other. But then the Gemara continues and says that the reason to do Adar in the first month is because ein mavirin ala mitzvahs. There's a general rule, many applications in different areas of halacha, that an opportunity to do a mitzvah, you don't pass it. So if you have an opportunity to do mitzvah of Purim right now, in Adar I, why would you leave it to Adar II? That's the opinion of Rabbi Eliyahu Rapoport. We don't pass in that way. We pass in mismach geula legeula. That we want to do Purim in the second Adar because we want to put together the Geula, the redemption, celebrating the redemption of Purim, together with celebrating the Geula, the redemption of Yetzias Mitzrayim, of Pesach, which, by the way, brings to mind the comment of Rashi, which I'm pretty sure we've discussed before. There's many sikhs where the Rebbe points out this Rashi that Mishanichnas of Adar Ma'abrim B'Simcha, that when the Gemara says that when Adar comes in, we increase in joy. Says Rashi, why do we increase in joy? Because it's the days of celebration, Purim and Pesach, right? So there's without getting into it right now, but just sort of another reminder that there's this conceptual correlation between celebrating Purim and celebrating Pesach on probably many different levels, and because of that, we want to put the Pesach, we want to put Purim, in the second Adar. Now, in the Yerushalmi, also, first it brings the same thing about B'chol Shana V'Shana, okay? And then it says, that we do Purim in the second month to juxtapose the Geula to Geula. And there the Karban Eda explains, kind of countering Rav Yossi in the Bavli, that says, yes, usually you would have thought to do Purim in the first month because Mavir Nala Mitzvahs, because you don't pass over a mitzvah, but because we have to counter that, this Svara, that Mismach Geula Geula, we want to bring the two Purim and Pesach as close as possible to each other, therefore we do it in the second month. Okay, then the Yerushalmi says another reason why to do it in the second Adar. The Yerushalmi says, that year, the year that the miracle of Purim happened, was a leap year, right? And therefore, and by the way, this is going to be important. I mean, a lot of the things that I'm saying now may not seem so relevant, but when we get into the detailed discussion about when to do a yard site and when to do a birthday, you'll see we're going to come back to a lot of these sources. But he's saying that he's taking it, this opinion in the Yerushalmi is taking it for granted that if something happens in a leap year in Adar II, then for sure we're going to celebrate it in a leap year in Adar II. Seems obvious. How does he know that year was a leap year? So remember, I mentioned before the pasuk that Tosfos brought. He says, the pasuk says, from month to month to the 12th month, the month of Adar. So it's sort of repetitious. Why do you need to say the 12th month, the month of Adar, right? So he says, no, the 12th month, but then plus another month because it's the month of Adar, meaning the month of Adar too. Again, I didn't have time to look into this Yerushalmi and to see if any commentaries discuss it more at length. At face value, that's the language of the Megillah. I mean, the Megillah also says, "B'chodesh hashlishi hu chodesh Sivan, and b'chodesh harasiri hu chodesh Teves." And there, clearly, there's no Teves 2 or Sivan 2. But for some reason, the Levi, this opinion in the Yerushalmi, understands from there that year was a leap year. Be that as it may, one moment. Be that as it may, we now have three independent reasons. 3 or 2? Misbach Gulu Lugula. Misbach Gulu Lugula and Shana Mambera. So we have two independent reasons why. Oh, and also the Shana V'Shana to the other that's closest to Nisan. However exactly you count it. We have now a number of reasons why we have to celebrate Purim in the second month. And therefore, you can't really bring proof from there that Adar 2 is the main Adar. It could be that Adar 1 is the main Adar. It could be that Adar 1 is the main Adar, and yet we still celebrate Purim in the second month because of Misbach Gula Gula. So if we're trying to determine sort of objectively which Adar is the main one and which one is the added one, we don't really have a proof. Yeah. Yes, David, do you want to add something?
Yeah, so I wanted to put together a calendar with artwork and Jewish, English dates and everything like that. So when do I put this together with the publisher and send it? I mean, like 6 months? Do I have what kind of time frame are we talking about?
Am I the publisher?
No.
How would I know?
Is it like, are these things planned like years in advance?
Oh, the calendar is predictable ad infinitum. The calendars, the cycle that we have now of the calendar is predicted. You can't. I mean, obviously, when Mashiach comes, we go back to doing the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh. But the system that we have in place pretty much goes on forever, and it would take thousands of years, literally, I think hundreds of thousands of years, for it to definitely tens of thousands of years for it to get off. In other words, for it to be so bad that Pesach would be completely, that we would put it this way. In order to get as far, I once read an article where he had a cheshbon of how long. Because every 100 years or so, we're pushing off the St. Talamot in one day because the 19-year cycle isn't 100% accurate. So, like in another, I don't know how many 100,000 years, we'll never save a St. Talamot because because it'll already be Pesach by the time that happens. but Mashiach comes before that, so that's not to worry. Now,
I mean, we could make a calendar, right?
Yes.
We have
Yeah.
calculus today.
yeah. Okay. Yeah.
First of all, when you said that, the first thought I had is, does it say that by the other months? I'm not a laner, so I wasn't sure. To me, if once that's the case, I was like, that would refute the argument.
Okay, but this is the Gemara, it's Yerushalmi,
Yeah.
so there's obviously more to it, which I didn't have a chance
Yeah.
to figure out yet. But it's not like a svara from a thing.
The thing I'm most wondering about is, it seems like no opinion is saying gold.
Oh, I was just going to say that. So that's that's going to come if we have time. The Chassam Sofer talks about that, but hopefully we're going to have time to get to that. But I should mention, the Gemara, there is a svara in the Gemara that we should do Adar Purim twice, but we learn out from a pasuk. I forget exactly what the limit is, but there's a limit. We derive from a pasuk in the Megillah that we don't do Purim twice, and therefore it's either or, right? But the reason that becomes so relevant is because when we're going to talk, for example, about yard sites, we'll see that there is a prevalent custom to do yard sites twice, right? So because by Purim, in other words, because that could be one approach could be default is you have to do it twice, but we can't do it twice. Okay.
And before
Now,
we made the calendar, that's what we did do, right?
No, not necessarily. No, because usually that was the exception to the rule. The rule was that the Beis Din would announce Adar Sheni way before, certainly before Purim, right? Before the beginning of Adar at the latest, and as early back as Tishrei. But it happened, I don't know how many times, but it can and did happen sometimes that they announced it after Purim. But that certainly was the exception, not the rule.
Right, and the form that we have is a lot more analogous to way beforehand. Right.
Yeah,
Like
right.
what we
Because
have today-
it's predictable. It's predictable
Now
forever.
It's completely predictable.
Right.
Just like when it's
Exactly.
when it's ahead of time.
Exactly. All right. However, Tosfos, okay, there's another whole discussion over here in the Yerushalmi, et cetera, where basically the question is when you add a month of in a regular, in the Hebrew calendar, some months are 29 days, some days are 30 days. Adar is always 29 days. In a regular year, Adar is 29 days. So there's a discussion more in the Yerushalmi. Tosfos mentions it in Rosh Hashanah Daf Yud base, but it's basically in the Yerushalmi at it's in over here in the end of Perek Aleph in the Megillah in the Yerushalmi Perek Aleph Halacha Hey. Basically, when you add a month of Adar, do you add 29 days or do you add 30 days? The bottom line in the Yerushalmi is that you could do either one. If I recall correctly, that's how the Rambam paskins also in Kiddush HaChodesh. I did not check it up. But I'm pretty sure the Rambam paskins also that you could add 20. The Beis Din could decide whether they want to add 29 days or 30 days. But the fact is that nowadays, when we have a fixed calendar, the Adar that we add is always 30 days. So Tosfos, and that Tosfos in Rosh Hashanah Yud base says that basically the fact that the month that we add is 30 days and a regular Adar is 29 days, that demonstrates that the Adar Rishon is the added one, right? So the Ikar, the primary Adar is Adar 2, right? And Adar 1 is the added one because Adar has 29 days. If you're adding 30 days, it must be that's the added one, right? That's
the other way around. The second one has 30.
no, the second one has 29 days,
Okay.
right? The first one has 30 days. So the one that has 30 days is the added one. That's basically what Tosfos. Again, the Tosfos is a bit more complicated than that, but that's I think the bottom line of what this Tosfos is to say. Tosfos acknowledges that in the time of Kiddush HaChodesh, there may have been times when it was 29 and 30. But the fact that when we went into a fixed calendar, we chose to always go with 30 demonstrates that that's that the first one is the added one. Now, the Yerushalmi explicitly asks this question. The Bavli doesn't talk anywhere explicitly about, what's the main Adar, first or second. But the Yerushalmi explicitly asks this question, which Adar is the main one? And before the Gemara answers, the Gemara says, well, what's the difference? Now, I, for one, could think of many differences, but the Yerushalmi says a somewhat obscure difference. The Yerushalmi says, as explained by the Mefarshim, that when you bring animals as a carbon in the Beis HaMikdash every day for carbon, Tamid, Musaf, whatever carbon it was, the carbon had to be Ben Shana in the first year, right? So the carbon had to be older than how many days? 8 days, right? We don't bring a carbon before it's 8 days, until 12 months. Once the animal is 12 months, it's no longer kosher for. There are certain sacrifices where the Asham, I think, there's certain kabbanas where the animal is older, but for most sacrifices had to be within the year. So the Gemara says that's the difference. If you have an animal that's born in Adar, and next year is a leap year, so if you say the first month is the main one, then when it comes to, let's say it's born on the 5th of Adar, next year's a leap year, so 5th of Adar 1, now the animal's a year old, it's no longer kosher for a carbon. If it's Adar 2 is the main one, then you get an extra month to bring the animal as a carbon. Anyway, that's the question of the Yerushalmi, and the Yerushalmi ends off by determining that the second Adar is the main one and the first Adar is the added one, based primarily on the Mishnah which we started today with, that you could add, that the Bezdin were allowed to add an Adar Sheni even at the end of Adar. So basically the Carbonate explains like this: if Adar Rishon is the main one, then on the last day of Adar Rishon, that's the last day of the year. Now it's too late to add another month. Like, you can't add another month when the year is finished. But if Adar Sheni is the main one and Adar 1 is the added one, so then if you're going to add now a month, then it turns out it's not really the last day of the year, because we have another whole month of the year. The previous month that we just passed is retroactively become the extra one. Anyway, the bottom line of the Yerushalmi is, again, based on that Mishnah, that Adar 2 is the primary Adar, and Adar 1 is the first, and Adar 1 is the added Adar. Now, this question, okay, any questions before we continue? Yes.
Yeah, is there also an example of the virgin 3-year-old girl and her Basulin?
Yes, if we have time, we'll get to that. So this question of which Adar is the main Adar has ramifications in all areas of Shulchan Aruch, in every that comes up in many cases. We're going to stick mainly to talking about birthdays and yahrzeits, which I think is what interests most people here. But there are other, for example, just yesterday we benched the Chodesh and we said it's Rosh Chodesh Adar Sheni. Now, Be'ikar Hadin is brought, I believe it's mentioned even in Shulchan Aruch, that the first Adar you say Rosh Chodesh Adar Rishon, and the second one you say Rosh Chodesh Adar. Nevertheless, the minhag is always to say Rishon and Sheni, because why not be more specific? But the assumption is that Adar, if you say Adar Stam means you say Adar without any further clarification. You're talking about the second Adar, and if you want to refer to the first Adar, then you have to say Adar Rishon, right? This is relevant to, for example, the writing of Ksuba, right? Again, the custom is we always say Adar Rishon and Adar Sheni, but conceptually, if you say, like the Yerushalmi and Tosfos say, that Adar 2 is the main Adar and Adar 1 is the added one, right? Then when you want to refer to Adar 2, you just say Adar. When you want to refer to Adar 1, you say Adar Rishon.
It would make a difference whether it was valid.
Of course, yes. Now, one of the cases where this comes up, by the way, is in Hilchos Nedarim. It's a Mishnah Nedarim Daf Samech Gimel Amud Aleph on Tamid Beis and the Ran over there. Basically, the maskana over there is that there's Rameir. We don't pass on Rameir. Rameir, he holds that if somebody says Adar Stam, so it depends. If he didn't know that there's going to be a leap year coming, so then we assume he meant the first Adar because he just meant the month after Shvat. But if he knew that there's a leap year, if he knew that there's a leap year coming, then he meant Adar 2. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, Stam Adar is Adar Rishon. I'm sorry, I said that all wrong. We paskin like, see that we get into conflict. We paskin like Rabbi Yehuda. I'm sorry, take that back. We paskin like Rabbi Yehuda. That's Adar Stam is Adar Rishon, right? Adar Stam is Adar Rishon. If you say Adar without thinking, you mean the first Adar. And if you want to refer to the second Adar, you have to say Adar Sheni. But nevertheless, I heard to point out that doesn't necessarily mean that what he's saying that Adar 2 is that Adar 1 is the main Adar. It could be because that when people are taking vows, for example, that's the context over there. There, what's relevant is not what the objective truth is of which month is the main one. What's relevant is what does the guy have in mind? How do people colloquially talk? So that kind of becomes a new point. Okay, now let's talk about.
Could also be like without a star, like a...
We're not talking about shtar. I don't have time to get into shtar. Let's move on to talking about bar mitzvahs. So again, the birthdays. We're talking about birthdays. Halachic now in Chabad we celebrate birthdays. We very much encourage celebrating birthdays. But for the most part, the only area where celebrating a birthday has at least the primary thing where celebrating a birthday has actual halachic ramifications is bar mitzvah, because what happens when a person's bar mitzvah? Suddenly the halachic reality changes. Now he could count for a minyan. Now he becomes obligated to do all mitzvahs, and as we'll see, punishable for neglecting to do the mitzvahs, etc., etc. So when does a person become bar mitzvah? Now you could make the argument. Look, the Yerushalmi and Tosfos both said that Adar Rishon is the first Adar. Sorry, that Adar Sheni, the second Adar, is the primary one, and Adar Rishon is the added one. So if Adar Sheni is the primary Adar, then that's when a person should become bar mitzvah, right? Now, there are people who say that. The Levush actually says that very clearly in the beginning of chapter in Siman Hey Sif Yud. The Levush makes that argument. However, there's an interesting vart in a letter from the Rebbe, which is printed in Likutei Sichos, volume 6, page 358, which is a letter that the Rebbe wrote in Tafshin Chav Zayin, 1967. And over there he says that it's a footnote in the letter, it's a cryptic thing, but he says that remember the Yerushalmi, which asks which Adar is the main Adar, and the Yerushalmi says, what's the difference, which Adar is the main one? And we come up with this whole sort of convoluted case about the animal that's burned. Why didn't you say a much more relevant, everyday relevant? Don't forget, the Yerushalmi is, right? We're talking here post temple times, right? So why doesn't the Yerushalmi say a nafka mina that's relevant to everybody all the time? When does a person become bar mitzvah? Right. So from
as opposed to something that involves
with the animal, right?
Sacrifice.
Right. Exactly. Says the Rebbe. If when your bar mitzvah is determined by which one is the main one, right? Then why doesn't the Yerushalmi say that difference? Elamai must be that which one is the main one doesn't determine when your bar mitzvah is. In other words, it's possible to say that the main one would be the second one, but your bar mitzvah will be the first one, or vice versa, right? I don't know.
It'll just be based on.
Well, I don't know why. We don't yet know. I'm not saying yet why. I'm just saying that the Rebbe is pointing out that l'chayra, if you wanted to determine when your bar mitzvah is, the question you have to ask is not which one is the main one. Now, 1 second. The Rebbe says, why not? And again, it's not really the topic of this letter. The Rebbe says a cryptic footnote in the letter, so I'm just trying to decipher it. The Rebbe says you could explain this based on the commentary of the Ridvaz. Now, the Ridvaz over there says like this, and he points to what Natan mentioned, that there is this a concept of B'sulei HaChayzin. B'sulei HaChayzin is a very important topic, and it goes into the whole approach of Torah, of Torah's interaction with reality. Basically, the idea is there's a concept that if somebody has relations with a girl, so if she's over the age of 3, then she is no longer b'sula. She's no longer considered a virgin, but virgin is the wrong word because, in other words, her hymen is no longer considered intact. So that has halachic ramifications. Whereas if somebody, let's say, raped a 2-year-old girl, so then it's a terrible thing. But halachically, she is still considered the virgin. Her hymen will repair itself. Right now, what happens? What happens if the girl turns 3? Because her birthday is on the 5th of Adar. The girl turns 3, and then subsequently the Beis Din decide to add another month. So the halacha is
right, and then they add another month. No.
Either way,
Something like that. Okay.
right? So no, yeah, so it's exactly right. Her birthday is on the 5th of Adar. Then she has right Chalila, and then they add another month. So the halacha is that b'sulei ha'chayzin, that now she retroactively became not 3 before, right? And that has tremendous ramifications. It's not just about a 3-year-old. It could be, I mean, that's the example the Gemara gives, but it could also be about a 9-year-old or even a 13-year-old, for example. Halachically, why is a 13-year-old bar mitzvah? Because he has to have, there's a chazaka, let's call it, there's a, how do you say chazaka in English? There's a presumption, let's say, that a 13-year-old will have 2 pubic hairs, which means that he's reached physical maturity, which is matching to his neshama maturity. Let's just say it like that, right? So what happens if you find pubic hairs on a child before the age of 13? So the halacha is that those are considered a shuma. They're not considered actual signs of maturity, we consider them to be some sort of other symptom, right? So the same thing would happen if a kid becomes 13 and he has 2 hairs. Oh, we see he's a gadol now. We're gonna count him for the minyan. Then Bezdin subsequently add a month. We're gonna say no. Those 2 hairs that we saw retroactively became not real pubic signs of maturity. They became this shuma, whatever that is exactly, right? So, in other words, in the famous words of the Chasam Sofer, the Torah has balabatishkeit over Teva. Torah controls the nature of this world. So, it could be, again, it's not clear to me, but I think that what the Rebbe means over here is that the Ridvaz, that's why the Yerushalmi has to bring this obscure case of the carbon, because in the carbon, it says like this: the animal turns 1 year old, right? Now you're adding a month. So if you're saying that the second month I'm adding is extra 1, so that's it. So the animal already became disqualified. Adding a month isn't going to undisqualify the animal. But if you're saying that the animal, the first month is the extra 1, so it turns out that retroactively the animal was never disqualified. It was retroactive, right? So how is the bar mitzvah different? So I'm not really sure. I'm not sure exactly what the Rebbe wants to bring from the Ridvaz. I'm still trying to figure it out. But what is evident, regardless of how we understand it, what is very clear is that what the argument that I was making is that the fact that the Yerushalmi makes this argument, makes this point, that the relevance of which month is the main one, has to do with the Karbanis. That teaches us that it's nothing that doesn't determine. What determines when your bar mitzvah is not about which month is the main one. However, Lamaisa, the Paskim say that, right, so in Shulchan Aruch, this subject is discussed in Orach Chaim Siman Hey, chapter 55, and over there the Mechaber rules and the words of the Ramah, Misha Neilad Ba'adar, somebody who's born in Adar in a regular year, V'nasa B'mitzvah B'shnasa Ibra, and it's 13 years later, is a leap year. Ein Nasa B'mitzvah Ad Adar Sheni does not become B'mitzvah until Adar Sheni. So the Ramah doesn't explain why, but the Ramah and the Mechaber, everybody agrees, it's implicit in the Mechaber also, everybody agrees that if somebody is born in a regular year, his Bar Mitzvah in a leap year is an Adar II. Now, I'm going to mention, we're not going to get too much into this, I'm just going to mention that the Magen Avraham has this, you might even say, obscure opinion, and he says that even if a person is born in a leap year in Adar Rishon, in the first Adar, he's not going to be bar mitzvah until Adar II in the leap year. And fascinating discussion, but we only have limited time left, and I want to get into other things. So happy to discuss that more afterwards, or to show you the references. But that's what the Magen Avraham says. Well, the Maisa, all the poskim disagree with this Magen Avraham, and the consensus of all poskim is Ashkenazi, Sephardi across the board. If somebody's born in a leap year, then whatever month he was born in, that's Bar Mitzvah. If somebody's born in a regular year, the Bar Mitzvah is in Adar II. Now, the Levush says a very interesting thing. The Levush is not over there in Siman Nun Hey. The Levush is in Siman Tov Reish Pei Hey, which is in the laws of just preceding the laws of Purim, the laws of the fast of Zayin Adar, which used to be a common practice. And he over there says that the reason why Bar Mitzvah is in the second month is very simple. And he brings us into the subject of Mazolis. Now, essentially what he's saying is, why do we have leap years? We have leap years to catch up, right? In other words, because you're not really where the sun was. Every year you're falling behind 11 days. So if this kid was born in a regular year in a month of Adar, that means he was born in the Mazel of Dagim, right? Because how do you say in English the Mazel of the month?
Horoscope.
The horoscope, that's what it's called?
Yeah,
the horoscope of the month of Adar. Now, we'll see soon. The Levush is not talking about this in some sort of mystical or he's not talking about the astro. Right, star sign, right? He's not talking about the he's not. The Levush is not at all talking about sort of the effect of the mazel on the person born. He's just talking science. That this kid was born in a regular Adar. That means he was born when the sun was at that part of its path in the mazel of Dagim, which is where those stars are located, right? If this year is a leap year, that means you're trying to catch up. That means in Adar I, the sun hasn't reached Dagim yet. It's still in Gli, which is the mazel of Shvat, the previous month. So obviously the bar mitzvah has to be in the second Adar because he's not really 13 years old yet. Right? In other words, if you're talking about 13 years, right? Well, a year is when the sun gets back to where it was. So if he was born in a regular Adar, that means he was born when the month was in Dagim, when the sun was in Dagim. So now we have to have bar mitzvah in Adar II when the sun is in Dagim. I should point out that this is not absolute, and the Chassam Sofer over here invokes the concept of Lakel Gomer Alai, which Natan mentioned about this girl who she turns 3, right? Because whichever way you cut it, and if you do the math, you'll see that bar mitzvah boys are not always the same age in terms of counting how many months they've lived through, because mainly because some bar mitzvah boys are going to have 4 leap years in those 13 years, and some bar mitzvah boys are going to have 15 years, 5 leap years in those 13 years, depending on where in the 19-year cycle they're born, right? So if you do the math, so you have either 7 times 12 plus 5 times 13, or 8 times 12 plus 4 times 13. So basically, some bar mitzvah boys are chronologically speaking 30 days younger than other bar mitzvah boys, right? Nevertheless, we call this uniform because Lakel Gomer Alai. Whenever the Beis Din decide now is a year, that then it goes and affects the maturity and literally the pubic hairs of this kid, right? So even though but nevertheless, even though it's not an exact science and there is an element of whatever Beis Din decide the year is, whether the year is 12 months or 13 months, that's going to affect the maturity of the boy. Nevertheless, the Levush says that, Boifin Klali, generally speaking, how to know how old the kid is? Well, it's when the sun comes back to where he was when he was born. And therefore, if he was born in a non-leap year and his bar mitzvah in a leap year, we're going to have to wait until the sun reaches its spot back in Mazel Dagim, which is in Adar II. Now, just I can't not mention this, that there's a fascinating omission in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch in chapter 55, where he completely omits this whole discussion about Adar I and Adar II. He doesn't say a word about it, which is very non-characteristic of the Alter Rebbe. And what I found based on the footnotes in the New Shulchan Aruch, this was addressed by the Rebbe in 3 different times. So I'll just in 1967, which is the same letter we mentioned before from the Yerushalmi, there the Rebbe says it would be very doichek, how do you say? It's very unlikely to suggest that the Alter Rebbe omitted it because he was going to include it somewhere else, either in the laws of Rish Chodesh or the laws of Purim or the laws of, which are sections of the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch that got burned that we don't have. That's unlikely. Or Ebu Kuntus HaShulchan. Kuntus HaShulchan is a book by Reb Chaim Noah, and Reb Chaim Noah, he basically says, and he's 100% convinced of this, and he brings some other examples, that it was just that what the Alter Rebbe did write it, and whoever typesetted it or printed it just accidentally left it out, and it passed by the editor's eye, and that was it. Later on, a number of years later, in 73, there's another letter from the Rebbe where the Rebbe says perhaps he wanted to bring them later on in one of those places. And then another time in a Sikha, I should say the references for the record, this second letter is printed in, the first letter is printed in Chelik Tezayin, Chelik Tezayin, page 603, and the second letter is printed actually earlier in Chelik Yud Aleph, so it was written later, but it was printed earlier. In page 311, and then finally in a Sikha in the Fabrengen in Tovshem Memvav 1986, volume volume 2, page 538, Ha'ara 11, or maybe it's 539. Over there, the Rebbe says that because it could be that he hadn't made up his mind what he thinks about it, and he was going to do it in the Madura Basra in the second edition, which we only have 4 chapters of the second edition of the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch. The reason why might that be, the Rebbe doesn't say this, but I'm just adding, it could be the reason why the Alter Rebbe hadn't made up his mind is because on the one hand, the Alter Rebbe, at least early in his life, was extremely loyal to the Mogen Avraham, and the Mogen Avraham has this, like I mentioned, obscure opinion that even if he's born in Adar I, he's bar mitzvah in Adar II. But on the other hand, literally all the poskim disagree with the Magen Avraham, and they basically demonstrate that the reason the Magen Avraham said it was because the primary source in question was not accessible to the Magen Avraham. So anyway, be that as it may, we don't have anything from the Alter Rebbe on this topic. Now, again, bottom line is your birthday bar mitzvahs are in Adar II, and yard sites, and therefore all birthdays are celebrated in Adar II. It's possible that some would have a chumrah. So let's say to put on tefillin or anything that's relevant to do already from the birthday in Adar one, but certainly we wouldn't count for a minyan or anything like that until Adar II. Now in Chabad, the custom is that we put on tefillin a few months before the bar mitzvah anyway. As there's two opinions in Shulchan Aruch, whether you should put on tefillin on your 13th birthday or 2 or 3 months before. And Chabad and many others do before, some do 1 month before, some do 3 months before, but some have a custom of what they call in America bo bayom, that you only put on tefillin on the day of your bar mitzvah, and so some people who have the minhag of bo bayom, in such a case they would put on tefillin 1 month before to be choshesh to the opinion that bar mitzvah is another one, but that's the consensus. Now, where this gets a little bit complicated is when it comes to yard sites. How do they call yard sites? Askara, yeah, and as far as them say askara, I think, right? Now, so the word yard site literally means year time. It's in English you say anniversary, right? Anniversary, that's what the word means. So what's the word anniversary mean?
And it's like annual.
Yeah.
In
Yar is year, and site is
it's time.
time.
In French, birthdays are called anniversaries. Anniversaire, I don't know how to exactly pronounce it. Yeah. Anyway.
Is yard site one word, or like anniversary?
Yeah.
You spell it yard.
Yeah. YAHRTZI. No, just kidding. Okay. All right. So now it's interesting. Nowadays, when we think of commemorating a yard site, what comes to mind? The parents' yard site. So in Shulchan Aruch in Tov Kuf Samaches, Chaim chapter 568 is in the laws of fasts. So over there, that's where yard sites come up. When are you supposed to fast for the yard site of a parent? So the Mechaber says Adar II, right? And that makes a lot of sense. It's very consistent with what he said about bar mitzvah, with what we said about bar mitzvahs. Bar mitzvahs are in Adar II, yard sites in Adar II. It's all very simple. And indeed, to this very day, that's how Sfardim, who generally speaking follow the Mechaber practice. And if we were Sfardim, we would close the class right now. However, the yard sites are also kept in Adar II. It's very consistent. It's very consistent. Adar II is the main month. That's what Tosfos says. That's what the Yerushalmi says. Birthdays are in Adar II. Yard sites are in Adar II. When you make a shtar and you say Adar Stam, it's going to be when you make a neder. Sorry, not a shtar. When you make a neder and you say Adar Stam, if you knew it was going to be a Shana Maberes, it's going to be Adar II, right? The Mechaber seems to be pretty much all consistent. However, the Ramah says V'yeshem Disana Berishin. He quotes the Maharil and the Rimins, who both say that actually you should fast the yard site fast in Adar Rishon. It's 9:57. We started at 9:10 approximately, so I'm going to probably go for another 10 minutes or so. I hope that's okay with everyone. So he brings this opinion that you should fast in Adar Rishon. Obviously, he says if he died in a leap year and it was Adar II, then you fast in Adar II. But if he died in a regular year where it was just one Adar, then you should fast in the first Adar. And again, this is the same Ramah who said bar mitzvahs are another two. Now he's saying yard sites are another one. The Chen HaMinhag, the Sanas Berishon, indeed, the prevalent custom testifies the Ramah is to fast in Adar Rishon. However, some have the custom to fast both. Right? Okay, so what's going on over here? What's going on? Why should we fast both? So why should yard sites be different than bar mitzvahs? That's really the main question over here. So there's a lot to discuss. There's a Magen Avraham, there's a famous Chassam Sofer, there's others. What I'm going to hopefully try to do is just sort of present at least the primary arguments in both directions. So First of all, we have this interesting discussion. We mentioned before that there's a sefer called Megillas Tanis, which we don't follow nowadays. But in Megillas Tanis, there's many, many dates which are special days, which days you fast, and also there's days of celebration. And on those days of celebration, it's forbidden to say a hesped, for example. It's forbidden to eulogize, right? So the Magen Avraham basically brings here a whole host of rayas, of proofs that Adar II is the primary one, right? So he's sort of bringing proofs to the opinion of the Mechaber to start off with. And what he demonstrates in the first number of lines over here is that it's clear that all the days in Adar recorded in Megillas Tanis that applied in Adar Sheni, in the second Adar. One of the examples is that there's this Megillas Tanis says that from the 1st to the 12th of Nisan. So the question is that there's a question in the Gemara over there. Yeah, the Gemara asks a question in Megillas Tanis. Why do you have to say from the 1st to the 12th? The first you anyway can't do anything because it's Rosh Chodesh. So it should have just said from the 2nd of Nisan. So the Gemara says no. If it would, because the Megillas Tanis, the days that I mentioned in Megillas Tanis, it's forbidden the day before also. So, but Rosh Chodesh is not forbidden the day before. So that's why the relevance of the Megillas Tanis is the day before. And then the Gemara goes on to say specifically about the relevance being to the 30th of Adar. Sorry, because here's where it goes. So now we have the 1st of Adar being one of the days of Megillas Tanis, and also the 28th, the 1st of Nisan, and also the 28th of Adar is. Okay. In the interest of saving time, I'll just summarize it like this: that what boils down from the whole. Right. The relevance of the Megillas Tanis is for the 29th of Adar, and if it would be talking about Adar 1, then it wouldn't work because then it would apply to the 30th of Adar, right? Basically, the Gemara says, why do you need this for the 29th of Adar? Why? Okay, we're mentioning the 1st of Nisan. The reason we're mentioning the 1st of Nisan because we need to carry it a day behind to the last day of Adar. But you don't need the 29th of Adar because 28th is also one of the days of Megillas Tanis, so that would be the day after the 28th, which is also covered. So that's what the end of the discussion of the Gemara. Now, if we're talking about Adar Rishon, that whole discussion doesn't make sense because the 29th is not the day before Rosh Chodesh. The day before Rosh Chodesh is the 30th, right? Again, it's all a mathematical question which we could go through, but it would just take me time, especially because I don't remember it so clearly. So I'd have to read the whole thing through again. The bottom line is the Magen Avraham is bringing all these proofs. Bear with me here that you should apply this. That everything should apply in Adar Sheni. So therefore, yard sites, he says, should be in Adar Sheni, as is the opinion of the Shulchan Aruch, of the Mechaber. But then he says. Then he says, okay, so that's what so the first opinion that you do it in Adar Sheni, we have all these proofs. Then he says, hold on a second. In the Gemara Megillah, we said that the reason you do Purim in the second month is in order to juxtapose Geula to Geula. We want to keep Pesach close to Purim. Now, obviously, that doesn't apply to a yard site. So, in other words, the implication of the Gemara is that Purim we do in the second month to Misbech Geula Geula, but if not for that reason, the default should be you do it in the first month. Right? So
it was originally in the second. There was usually 2 odd hours.
No, we're talking about a person who died in not Purim.
Talking for Purim.
Well, that was one opinion in the Yerushalmi, right? But the regular Gemara said Mismich Geula Geula. That we want, right? So the implication is that a regular yard site should be another one, or anything else. So that's the Teres Abayas, I think. I'm not sure which Teres Abayas he's bringing this proof from. That he says hold on. No, Shuvas Maharil says no. You know why you need for Purim the reason of Misbech Gula Geula? Because there's another thing to counter that. If not for the reason of Misbech Gula Geula, I would counter it and say you have to dafka do Purim in the first Adar because Ein Ma'avirin Ala Mitzvahs. But Ein Ma'avirin Ala Mitzvahs, not leaving a mitzvah, doesn't apply to a yard site, says the Maharil. But what the Maharil takes for granted that Ein Ma'avirin Ala Mitzvahs doesn't apply to a yard site, not everybody takes for granted at all. If you look in the Levush that we mentioned before in Tafresh Pehei, he says, no, absolutely. The reason why you do a yard site in Adar Rishon is because Ein Ma'avirin Ala Mitzvahs says you have here an opportunity to fast, which is a mitzvah, and it's going to be provide kapara, provides the reason a person fasts on the yard site is to provide atonement for the and to benefit the neshama of his parent in an olam ha'emes. So that's certainly a mitzvah which we shouldn't pass up the opportunity. When it comes to bar mitzvah, besides the thing of the mazalos, which he said later, he says also it's not such an opportunity and it's more of a responsibility. You become bar unshin, so for it's a responsibility, then we want to push it off. But if it's an opportunity, then Ein Ma'avirin Ala Mitzvahs. And similarly, in the Tshuva of the Chasam Sofer, but then you have another counter argument. The counter argument is that we don't, something that's harsh, we don't bring earlier. So, for example, when a fast falls on Shabbos, we don't bring it back. When Shabbos B'Tammuz, for example, falls on Shabbos, we don't bring it forward to Thursday. We push it off to Sunday, right? So here also, if you have a chance to fast in the first or the second one, we should say push it off. Says the Marival, no, hold on a second. This is not a punishment. This is not a fast for kapara. This is not a punishment type of fast. This is a fast for atonement. Says Chasam Sofer, so what? Even Shavasa B'Tammuz, the Rambam also says it's for atonement. So atonement and Puran Nisa, which let's say some negative thing, are not mutually exclusive. So we have all these sort of conflicting reasonings. On the one hand, we should do the fast for the yard site in Adar Rishon because Ein Ma'avirin Ala Mitzvahs, and we want to have the opportunity to bring kapara to the father as close as possible. But on the other hand, we want to do it in Adar Sheni because we don't bring it fast earlier than necessary, and also because of all these other things that it seems axiomatic in Megillas Tanis, as the Magen Avraham elaborated on, that we don't do that everything, all the dates that we commemorate apply in Adar Sheni. The bottom line is that the Ramah comes down on this side of yard sites are in Adar Rishon and birthdays are in Adar Sheni. And one way to understand it is, like I said, the Levush. And he says, look, yard sites is an opportunity and Ein Ma'avirin Ala Mitzvahs versus birthdays, which A is a responsibility and B is more dependent on the mazalis of, sort of like you mentioned before, when you catch up to the mazal or the dogim. And then you have, I guess if we're to summarize it, those are the primary arguments in each direction. However, there is also the minhag that the Ramah mentions that you should do the yard site in both, which l'chayra is based on the svar that Ari mentioned before, that there is a svar to do it in both, and it's only with Purim where we have a specific implication of the pasuk that you could only do Purim once, so we have to choose between Adar Rishon and Adar Sheni. But if yard site, you don't have to choose, and therefore, if possible, you should do both. Now, nowadays, most people don't fast necessarily on the yard site of a parent, but it's for Kaddish. And Kaddish is also a similar type of thing. It's done for the Aliyah Neshama of the parent. The Maisa, based on that, 1 second. So based on this minhag, the minhag became that we commemorate yard sites primarily in Adar Rishon, but most people do also in Adar Sheni. Where it becomes extra relevant is when there's a queue, when there's a line for the Amid, right? In other words, if you have the Amid, you want to just say Kaddish or the Amid, fine. But if you want to say, oh, I have yahrzeit, you get away from the Amid, right? So there, the Magen Avraham paskins that the Avelim only have to give the yahrzeit one kaddish. If you're going to say kaddish adam to take away from somebody else, then you don't. Then you can only do it once. You could say kaddish, whatever. Yeah, and that's indeed that's indeed a common practice amongst Ashkenazim today. I'm pretty sure that you say kaddish on everything twice. But the main one is the first one when it comes to yahrzeits, and therefore you don't, if it would involve a conflict of pushing someone away from the Amud, for the second one you wouldn't do that. Yes.
Just to clarify, to take from somebody else who has a chiyuv.
Yeah.
To take from somebody else that is just wants it down for the other.
Yeah.
It's your second yahrzeit.
Yeah. It says the Avelim. Lashon of the Magen Avraham Avelim.
There's like multiple levels of chiyuv as well. There's like a whole priority system that goes into it.
Right.
Yeah,
So it
but
has
this
the
is-
chiyuv
Yeah.
because-
Yeah, I mean there could be somebody else.
This is
The less priority.
We're talking about a chiyuv. You already really built
Kind of did, right.
Okay, and just the words of the Magen Avraham are L'kuli almo ha'avelim ein tzrichim little kaddish ala pa'amachas. Okay, all right. Now, a couple more things that I just want to quickly touch upon. So first of all, we had this as advertised. Why have there not been any bar mitzvahs for a whole year? So this is a mathematical equation, which unfortunately I don't have the charts to put on the thing, but just bear with me over here. We said 7 leap years out of every 19 years. The leap years are, who remembers the numbers? 3, 6, 8,
11? No, 14, 13.
14, 14, 17, 19, right? So
I have no idea.
Wow.
now, out of those 7 years, right, you only get bar mitzvahs for somebody who's born in a regular year is going to be an Adar Sheni. So if you have a leap year that's 13 years after a non-leap year, then there's going to be a whole month with no bar mitzvahs because everybody's birthday. Now, of those 7 leap years, right, 3 of them are 13 years after another leap year. So year 19 is 13 years after year 6. Year 8 is going to be 13 years after year 14. And year 11 is going to be 13 years after year 17. So in those years, there's going to be bar mitzvahs like regular. There's not going to be any change in the bar mitzvahs. But in years 3, 6, 14, and 17, right? Those are leap years which come 13 years after a non-leap year, such as this year. This year, 5782 is year 6 in the 19-year cycle. 13 years ago was year 12. Year 12 was not a leap year. So in year 12, anybody who was born in the month of Adar is this year, in year 12, last year 12. What was last year 12? It was 13 years ago in Tavshim Peves in 5769, right? So in 5769 was year 12 of the 19-year cycle, which was a non-leap year. So anybody who was born in the month of Adar 5769 is now celebrating their bar mitzvah in the second in Adar Sheni. So therefore, you have a whole month of Adar Rishon where there aren't any bar mitzvahs, and that's across the board for Ashkenazim and Sephardim. And so if you make your parnasa because you're a photographer or selling Judaica or caterers or renting out halls, and you make a big part of your income for bar mitzvahs, you better know about this. And when it comes to those 4 years in the cycle, budget that you're going to have a whole month with no parnasa, with no income. And I know somebody who was on the wrong side of that, right? Not now, some time back. He said he's a photographer. He has a few bar mitzvahs a week. He only did it exclusively bar mitzvahs. He lived in Crown Heights, a very big, the bar mitzvahs all the time. And suddenly he had a whole month with nothing. And he couldn't figure out what was going on. He's like, what happened to my reputation? Right? But there are no bar mitzvahs. And by the way, ironically, what now happens is that you could have, and this is mentioned explicitly in Shulchan Aruch, that you could have 2 people who one of them is younger than the other, but will be bar mitzvah first. Because if you have people who are born in a leap year, so somebody was born, let's say today is the 26th of Adar I, which is the birthday of Meir Hecht. Meir Hecht from Evanston, it's his birthday today. He was born many years ago on a leap year in Adar I, right? 2.5 weeks later was Purim, and Zelig Moskowitz, who's a shliach in Friendship Circle, he was born 2.5 weeks later.
In Adar Sheni.
In Adar Sheni. 13 years later was a non-leap year. And so Zelig Moskowitz, who's 2.5 weeks younger than Meir Hech, was bar mitzvah a week and a half before him. Because Purim came before the 26th of Adar that year.
Can I ask like a
1 second.
question?
No, after the class. Now, just finally, again, we were way over time here, but just to finish off about mazolis, right? So some people are very into mazolis. Now, as we mentioned before, the Levush says in his calculation of the mazolis that the mazel of Adar Rishon is the mazel of Dli. In other words, the mazel of Shvat. You're still catching up from Shvat, so the mazel of Adar Rishon is like the mazel of Dli. But you have other sources that say otherwise. So first of all, the Chazkuni is a very important source. He's a Rishon. He lived in 1240 in France, and he has a commentary on the Chumash. And he says in Parshas B'Shalach, in the war of the first original war with Amalek, B'char Lanu Anoshim, he says that Moshe Rabbeinu told Yeshua to choose people who were born in the second Adar. He says in Adar Sheni, because people who were born in the second Adar have no mazel. There's no mazel of Adar Sheni. And he says, therefore, the Amalekim, they were sorcerers, and they knew how to overcome people who were born in the mazalis. But people who are born in Adar Sheni have no mazel, and therefore that's how they would be victorious over Amalek. That's the Chazkuni saying that. So that's a very important source. So then there's also a Maharsha. The Maharsha is in Sanhedrin, Daf Beis Amud Aleph, and he says that actually there is the mazel of both Adars is the mazel of Dagim, and he says the 12 months corresponds to the 12th tribe. We have the tribe of Yosef, who is split into two, Menashe and Ephraim, who therefore he gets 2 months of Adar 1 and Adar 2. Yosef is Aleyoin, is compared to the Yidgul Arov. Yosef's Menashe and Ephraim are compared to fish, and that fits very well with Adar being the mazel of Dagim. The mazel of fish is Adar, that matches with the month of Yosef. And in many Chassidish Sfarim, a big deal is made about Adar Rishon, Adar Sheni being above mazel, and also about being associated with the months of with the mazel with the bracha of Yosef of Dagim, of being the Maila from sort of beyond mazel. So it's a sort of more power to us, and the Kedushas Levi actually points out a very interesting thing. If you go through the names of all the mazalis in Hebrew, you'll see that all of them are in the singular. Akrav, Keshes, Glid, Gdid, Dli, Tlesh, Shoyer, Sartan, all singular words. Besides Toimim, twins, which Toimim can only be double. You can't have, right? Toimim by definition is double, is plural. Similarly, Moznaim, which is a scale. Again, a scale by definition is double. There's the two sides to the scale. But all the others are singular with the exception of Dogim. We don't say Mazel Adar dog. Mazel of Adar is fish. Well, and it's interesting. Fish is one of the very few words in English that are the same in singular and in plural, right? Fish and fish, but fishies, fishies, right? But he says that Adar is the only month which could have very well been Mazel Adar dog, fish in the singular, but yet it's Mazel Adar dogim, fishies in the plural, because it represents the double shevet of Yosef. Here he brings this comment that I mentioned before from the Chazkuni about Yeshua choosing soldiers who were born in Adar Sheni. Kedushas Halevi, he quotes it b'shem derikeach va'medrash. So that goes even more. That goes back to Chazal. That's even a much earlier source for Adar being a month which goes beyond Mazalis. It's brought also Rabbi Eliyahu is right into it. Okay, and that brings to a close today's class.
Menashe, Ephraim, Risha,